We're sort of doing this impromptu little get-together. This is Adam Klasfeld, for those of you who don't know him, legal journalist extraordinaire. And he has just watched the entire hearing in the Abrego Garcia case in Maryland. You know, it gets a little bit confusing. There's the criminal case in Tennessee where the government has charged him with, in essence, human smuggling. This is the civil case that his wife filed on his behalf back in March. The case challenging the government's actions, the lack of due process. And so Adam and I were just chatting before you all joined. And we appreciate all of y'all being here. I mean, this was an unusual hearing. The judge, as I so inelegantly phrased it, seemed pissed off.
She did, absolutely, from start to finish. I was just telling you before everyone else joined us that I can't remember the last time I heard a federal judge remind government attorneys quite as often as she did that they are officers of the court, meaning just telling them, you should not lie to me right now. And there's reasons why she kept saying that. Just starting up with the bottom line up front, she has ordered the government to produce someone to testify under oath about their plans for Kilmar Abrego Garcia come July 16th, when he could possibly be released from criminal custody. That's the
Let's
date.
just clarify that for a second. He's in pretrial custody in Nashville. And although the judge up there indicated that there was no reason to hold him, he remains in custody to protect him from being deported until July 16 is a hearing date, right? The judge will hold a hearing to determine these issues. So again, in the criminal case, here we are in the civil case with this coming into play, with the government taking what looks to me like conflicting positions in the two cases.
Absolutely. And she went through all of those conflicting positions. Now, this is why she is reminding the lawyers over and over again that they're officers of the court. One inconsistency. The government still has a pending motion to dismiss, because you remember this motion, Joyce, because they have no power to get the El Salvador government to act. Lo and behold, they filed this motion 6 days before Kilmar Abrego Garcia was indicted under seal in the Middle District of Tennessee. A turn of events that the judge slammed as both illogical and highly problematic. Now, how do they walk into her court saying, we have no power over what Ukele might do, Your Honor, and then 6 days later have Mr. Abrego indicted under seal? So that was inconsistency number one. That was a motion to dismiss that she denied today, along with a separate motion to dismiss, and we'll get back to it.
Can we not leave that too quickly? That's an embarrassment for the government. That's a black eye that they filed this motion saying, oh, we have no control. And then suddenly they do have control. And without any effort, they could have, frankly, dismissed their own motion before this and spared themselves the embarrassment. They could have filed sort of an explanatory statement or had something to say in court this morning to explain to the judge what happened. But in essence, they couldn't. And the best that the lawyer for the government could do was just to say, well, Judge, there were ongoing negotiations and we weren't sure what the outcome would be. And the judge was very quick to jump back and to say, but you knew that they were going on. You knew there was a possibility. And yet you represented that there was no chance that you were going to get him back. I mean, it's rare that you see a federal judge who appears to be righteously angry. I mean, judges get angry on the bench, but this wasn't about like a lawyer did something silly. This was about the United States lied to her, was what this felt like.
Absolutely. And there was another, to take us a step back even further. Folks on this live stream surely remember when there was a hearing where a now former Justice Department attorney called Erez Ruveni admitted that, whoops, we made an administrative error in whisking and spiriting Kilmar Abrego Garcia out of the country. And that was an administrative error, Your Honor. He was fired for that. Government attorneys went into court and said it was not an error. We did not make an error, Your Honor. Now, today in court, they flip-flopped once again. You had a new Justice Department attorney, Bridget O'Hickey, saying, "Yes, Your Honor, it was an error. You don't need to have other relief because we are not in the habit of making errors. This is a one-time thing. It's not going to happen again." So that was another inconsistency that again had the judge remind the government that they are officers of the court.
Yeah, Bridget O'Hickey, who I don't know, I think is a 2023 law school graduate. She was working in the Attorney General's office in Florida, of course, where Pam Bondi came to the Justice Department from. She was hired at DOJ something like 30 days ago. So this is a lawyer who knows Florida state law. Now she's in a courtroom arguing a federal case in front of a federal judge. And I can tell you that those are two very, very different environments. What surprises me is that a case of this seriousness, where the integrity of the government is being challenged, this is a case where you send one of your most senior assistant United States attorneys, maybe your civil chief. This is a civil case, not a criminal case. These cases are usually handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the district. And so it's just astonishing that we have somebody from Main Justice in the room with this real lack of a federal pedigree. It can't have been a great position for her to be in. I'm forced to wonder whether that happened because no career employee in Baltimore was willing to take this forward.
That's a very, as an inference, that tracks because she seemed at the beginning of the hearing entirely unprepared for the judge's questions. The judge asked her on multiple occasions, "Did you not prepare this? Did you not confer with your clients," meaning the relevant government agencies? And she repeatedly had no answer to that. She seemed unprepared. Next to her, another Justice Department attorney, Jonathan Gwynn, had to be reminded again by the judge, "He's an officer of the court. I'm directing you to answer," the judge said, "questions about when and where the deportations are going to happen." Now, he danced around it. He said that they do not know. Multiple times during the proceedings, the judge said, "I don't believe that," because let's take a step back. Today is July 7th. By July 16th, we are potentially going to see a federal judge in Nashville, Tennessee, order Kilmar Abrego Garcia's release. So what happens after it? Does the government have the plan? Right now, the government's claim is it doesn't. They're going to wait until the defendant is in ICE custody. Then they will decide that the first track of possibilities is they send him to a third country, or try to send him to a third country. Is it South Sudan? Is it Mexico? Is it Honduras? We do not know. They will not say. On Thursday, there's going to be someone there to testify under oath. We don't know the identity of the individual yet. That's going to be proffered sometime later this week.
Right.
But
I think the judge asked them to confirm who that individual was by 9 a.m. the morning of the hearing, just to give her a heads up. I
that's
mean,
correct.
it's utterly crazy. Did the government lawyers, did they keep a straight face when they told a federal judge that they couldn't make any plans until the guy was back in immigration custody? That's just it doesn't make any sense, to be honest.
Right. And that's why the judge said multiple times that she didn't believe the representations that the government was making. And we'll see what happens on Thursday when they actually have someone say give testimony under oath on this. I will say there was another moment, that you had the one attorney, Bridget O'Hickey, seemed unprepared, but you had Jonathan Gwynn appear indignant. At what point he told the judge, "This is someone you don't want in your neighborhood," and the judge cut him off right at that moment and said, "I don't need your stump speech, that this isn't about the Trump administration's political messaging about how bad Kilmar Abrego Garcia allegedly is. This is about the rights, constitutional rights and statutory protections being followed, the rules and procedures being put in place." And it seemed to me, now what this is all leading up to is a ruling potentially on whether the judge has the power to order his return back to where I am right now, into the District of Maryland. where he would be closer to his wife and 3 children. That's what the Thursday's hearing is about. It's about creating a record that if it looks like the government is willing to say under oath that there will be systems in place, that this isn't another dead of night whisking onto an airplane to an unknown country, then perhaps the case is mooted out. On the other hand, if the government will not say where or when they are taking Kilmar Abrego Garcia come July 16th, this can have a very different outcome. And so that's what today was about. And I should add, just kind of to get a bigger picture here, at the plaintiff's table with the attorneys for Kilmar Abrego Garcia was his wife, Jennifer Vasquez Sura. She lives with their 3 children in the District of Maryland, and that's what this is about. Will he be able to await his trial, uh, uh, defend himself from the very allegations the government has leveled at him uh, in the place where his family lives? There's another open question about whether he will have a trial. Because remember, the government will not say that they are waiting for him to be able to defend himself against the allegations, which largely fell apart during his bail hearing. At least some of the allegations that the government leveled at him at the Pam Bondi press conference. But will he be able to defend himself against the charges of the indictment before being deported? The government said in no uncertain terms, and this was Jonathan Gwynn from the Department of Justice, he said in no uncertain terms that they are not waiting. The government the judge pressed him on that multiple times, and they said, no, we are not waiting for the criminal trial to take its course. If he is released, he will be put into ICE custody, and then deportation proceedings will begin, whether it's to a third country or whether it's if they try to reverse the order that has barred his deportation to El Salvador, the one they violated back in March.
I thought the judge was very clear in that part of the hearing, right? And it came through that the government's intention is not to try this criminal case, which they precipitously indicted, perhaps in a disingenuous fashion, and now are willing to dismiss because they just want to get this man out of the country. That looks to me like a political play, not a legal one. And we have the prospect that this is a Justice Department and a Department of Homeland Security that are playing to an audience of one. Court cases are supposed to be about the law and the facts. I'm not telling y'all anything that you don't already know. But I think it's important that we not lose our sense of outrage and our sense of shock. Nobody's surprised. It's still shocking to see the Justice Department doing the president's bidding to the point where a federal judge has to tell a Justice Department lawyer she's not interested in hearing his stump speech. And so in Abrego Garcia's original complaint, he asked, and in essence, the relief that he asks for is to be returned from El Salvador. And there was some back and forth about whether or not that had been accomplished, which meant that this lawsuit should have been dismissed. But Abrego Garcia's lawyers, and the judge seemed to chime in on this, made an argument that the complaint went further than that, and it demanded that he be restored to his status quo ante. That would mean being in Maryland, where he was under an immigration supervision order. And the judge seems to believe that that's the most appropriate course of action here. It'll be very interesting to see if Abrego Garcia can get an additional injunction, which will tell the government, no, you can't take him back into custody if he's released. No, you can't deport him to a third country. I'm very interested in your impressions of how good of a job Judge Zenas did about building a record in that regard that would stand up on appeal. I mean, this case has already gone to the Fourth Circuit. We saw that incredible opinion from J. Harvey Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, really putting the government in its place on the due process argument. And of course, the Supreme Court case had sort of mixed results, but had the impact ultimately of leading to this return. Something interesting that I saw in the hearing today, by the way, was the government wanting to make the argument that the judge no longer has jurisdiction, really lacks jurisdiction to hear
Mhm.
this case. And she shut them down pretty easily, saying, this case went to the Fourth Circuit and they ruled explicitly that there was jurisdiction to hear it. And the Supreme Court may not have taken it up explicitly, but the Supreme Court is not in the habit of hearing cases it doesn't have jurisdiction over. This was a bad day for the government, not a good outing.
Absolutely. And to your point, she is very methodically building a record. She is taking each and every argument that the government is making from jurisdiction, pointing out the absurdity of arguing that the case, well, that particular matter was undecided when the Fourth Circuit explicitly affirmed it, and that the Supreme Court is not in the habit of delivering rulings in cases over which they have no jurisdiction. Uh, she very methodically went through each and every procedural issues. It's a why that she ordered the hearing on Thursday. Again, in this
Is
district,
that Thursday this week or Thursday next week?
that's Thursday this week.
This week, okay.
They are moving very quickly because again, by next week, specifically July 16th, we could potentially see a judge ordering the release on bail of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So that's why there's a tremendous amount of urgency, and that's why she's building this record, but doing it with such speed.
This entire case, it seems to me, is just one misstep after the other by the government. There's the original mistake, and they're back to calling it a mistake in deporting him. Of course, everybody from Donald Trump on down for a time said, oh, no, it wasn't a mistake. This was absolutely what we meant to do. Today in court, we have lawyers telling the judge it was just a one-off administrative error. You don't have to worry about us doing this again. Not a big deal, which again, I think probably was the breaking point for the judge. It certainly was for me. But the reality is in this country, we have laws that make people who are here without legal status deportable. There is a withholding order in this case. An immigration judge in 2019 said, you can't send him back to El Salvador. He came to this country to avoid gang threats that were violent, that were vicious, that were sustained. Sending him back would put him in a dangerous position. And I saw the government's lawyers today saying that they wanted to reconsider that withholding order. Was there more on that, and what did you take away?
That's exactly right, Joyce. What the government said is they haven't made up their mind as to whether they are going to try to deport him to a third country. Again, we don't know what country on the map. Any human rights abuser, war-torn
South
country, they
Sudan, right?
South Sudan, they won't say. They won't rule out anything or narrow it down. On the other hand, they might try to reverse the order that they violated back in March by sending Mr. Abrego to El Salvador. Say that they will try to contest it. It's door number one or door number two, and they won't narrow it down. And that's why we're having this hearing on Thursday.
Mm. Well, what do you think is going to happen next? I mean, you've watched the criminal case and the civil case. Where do you think this is headed?
I will say that this case never ceases to surprise. So, with that caveat, I did not anticipate the judge was going to order this hearing on Thursday. Now that she has, it seems very clear that whatever witness the government is going to put on the stand, I would be surprised if they give a straight answer. If they say, yes, we're going to try to deport him to Honduras, we're going to try to deport him to South Sudan, I think they're going to walk around the issue and the judge will deliver a ruling potentially accordingly. And then we could see this going up to a head next week. For the record, I will be going down to Nashville, Tennessee next week to see what happens when a judge is going to review. Right now it's before the district judge, and he's reviewing his magistrate's order, finding that the government does not have the authority to detain Mr. Abrego. They did not produce the evidence to show that he is a risk to the community or a risk of flight. So if he upholds that, he could be released. And I would not be surprised given the way this played out today, uh, if the judge finds that she has the power to do something to protect Mr. Abrego's constitutional rights, and appellate litigation follows. But again, these are tight deadlines we're working toward. This is July 16th is just around the corner. So these questions are going to be answered very, very soon. And that's why I'm trying to be on the ground to learn those answers.
Well, I appreciate that you're doing that. There's nothing like actually seeing it in the courtroom. You just take in so much that you can't get from somebody who's live blogging, or even when there's audio access, because of course we don't have cameras in federal courts. Those of you who are longtime readers of my newsletter know that this is something of a bugaboo issue for me. I just simply fail to understand why we can't have cameras in federal courts for these important hearings so all of us can listen in, which makes the work that you're doing super important. I think you're right to flag the appeal as the big issue here. The Fourth Circuit, notoriously conservative, is going to do what it's going to do. It's a law and order, do the right thing sort of circuit, which is the circuit that I would want to be in for a case like this. And then, of course, it goes back to the Supreme Court, which has been, I'll just say less than stellar. We saw the shadow docket decision late last week that permitted the deportation of men to South Sudan who had no ties to that country. That's a country that the State Department says it's unsafe for Americans to travel in, but apparently it's okay for us to deport people to that country. It's just
Yeah.
sort of crazy.
Right. And they did that on the 4th of July, Joyce. It was on at 7 p.m. A plane took off from a tarmac in Djibouti, on a military base in Djibouti, and delivered 8 men without notice and process, without an opportunity to complete reasonable fear interviews, testing whether they feared being killed or tortured in their destination. And that's what the Supreme Court refused to intervene, and wouldn't tell us why. Wouldn't tell us why. So I think folks do have every reason to be skeptical about the rights of anyone being protected at this administration's say so. At the same time, I think it's because the Supreme Court did not elucidate its reasoning, because Judge Zini's pointed out that her orders have been upheld largely on appeal in the past, that anything can happen. And one thing this case has been entirely unexpected from start to finish.
In some ways, this case feels like if I was going to write a parody about the Trump administration, what happened today in court feels a little bit like this, because here you have the government's lawyers who come in, and everything that comes out of their mouths is really incredible, starting with oh, Judge, this was just a one-off mistake, nothing to look at here, even though the government has flip-flopped so many times. I mean, it just was utterly sort of a remarkable effort. I really wondered how the government lawyers were pulling it off with a straight face. And that's very much what the Trump administration does, right? I mean, they tell these incredible whoppers, but they tell them so persistently, so consistently, with such straight faces that the base falls for it. And then you've got Abrego Garcia's lawyers in court saying, Judge, none of this makes sense. And at one point, one of Mr. Abrego Garcia's lawyers, the judge had said something about asking the lawyer for the government a question. And Abrego Garcia's lawyer said, I'll just stop talking and listen, because if I can get a straight answer, it'll be the first time. There's just this sense of incredulity that the Justice Department can't deliver the truth, can't deliver a reliable narrative in this situation. And of course, what's different here is that instead of the Supreme Court, we've got a federal judge who is listening to both sides and who is skeptical of the government and believes that the plaintiff's lawyers are telling the truth. And I think it's important that we say, that's not to say that Mr. Abrego Garcia is a great guy. I don't know. I can't vouch for him. What I do know is he has foundational due process rights before he's deported, because if he doesn't have them, none of us have them, right? I mean, if he
That
has no right, any of us could be picked up and that would be it.
Right. And as a matter of fact, at a press conference following the hearing, Mr. Abrego's attorney, Simon Sandoval Moshenberg, made this very point, said when he got this case, he thought this was a one off crazy what the government is doing case. He later learned this was a tip of the spear. The third country deportations were just ramping up. And that's what makes this case important. It's not about the person of Kilmar Abrego Garcia or vouching for everything he is or everything he may or may not have done as an individual. It's about the fact that from the get go in this case, this has been a case of the government violating a court order to hustle him onto a plane to what this particular judge, Judge Zinis, called one of the most dangerous prisons in the Western Hemisphere, a prison where he says he was tortured in truly shocking court papers and finding out whether, once the government has leveled these serious allegations against him, whether he can defend himself at trial in the American way, a rule of law way. And that's what we still have as an unanswered question.
So I know a lot of people are feeling depressed. This is another one of those moments where we worry quite legitimately that Trump has managed to break the rule of law. But I'll tell y'all, I have a different take on it that I'll share with you for what it's worth. The fact that this case was brought in the first place, and we all know the original story, right? I think 258 men, Adam, you'll correct me if I have the number wrong, but hustled out of the country, with a judge just sort of trying to keep it from happening. The government persists, flies them out of the country into a Seacot prison, where they, as you say, were subject to incredible conditions that we're learning about from Mr. Abrego Garcia's filings in court. Somehow lawyers managed to figure out what's going on. They managed to file a case. We get federal judges who intervene. The case goes to the United States Supreme Court. It may not have been a fully satisfying decision, but they ordered the government to do its best to bring him back. And ultimately, this is the moment that we don't talk about enough. I think the government flinched here. The government had been saying all along, sorry, he's in Bukele's custody. He belongs to El Salvador. We can't bring him back. But they did it. And they
Right.
did it because they understood that they had reached the limits of the American people's tolerance. And so, yes, they filed these charges that, as Adam says, don't look like they're going to hold up very well in court, but we don't know. Maybe the government
Right.
will get better evidence. Maybe they'll get a conviction. That process should play out, in the way that it normally would in any case. But the point that I'm making is our criminal justice system worked and our legal system worked here, and Donald Trump was forced to blink. Abrego Garcia is back in the United States. His future is uncertain, but he has become the face of due process in this country. And not for nothing, at the last big protest, the No Kings protest, Americans held signs that said due process. I don't think anyone saw that coming. And what we've done is we've put the lie to all the people who say that Americans don't care about democracy. We're out protesting. We're paying attention to obscure court cases. We all know Mr. Abrego Garcia's actions. And so before you let Donald Trump and MAGA convince you that we have lost and that democracy is over, take a minute and think about how much success there is and how much due process and how much democracy is wrapped up in going here. I think we've got a little bit more play in the joints than people are giving us credit for. Don't obey in advance. Don't listen to people who tell you to just give up. This, I think, in many ways is a remarkable story, and this is a case that will live in history. This will be one of the case names that people in the future will know, like some of the other famous cases, Marbury versus Madison, or take your pick from there on out. Abrego Garcia's name will live in this case.
Absolutely. And I will echo and co-sign all of your points, but especially your optimism. I will say the day of the No Kings protest, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, because I had just covered Abrego's hearing. And there were large, vibrant, joyful protests very close to that courthouse where it took place. As a matter of fact, That day, during Abrego's first criminal court appearance in Nashville, Tennessee, there were hundreds of protesters outside the courthouse because in Nashville, Tennessee, there were ICE raids that racked the immigrant community there, a neighborhood called Antioch. And so there were people were watching, people who were there were paying attention. They are having hope. They are attending the protests both before and after the proceedings. And one of the reasons I like being on the ground and conveying this reporting to listeners, viewers, readers is to show the complexities of our legal system and what can happen, the power that common people have. Yes, those 8 men who were sent to South Sudan were ultimately sent to their final destination. But before that time, there were lawyers working around the clock on a holiday. That's the American way.
It is incredible. Well, Adam, thanks for joining me for this. Y'all, I hope that you will follow my friend Adam Klasfeld. As you've seen, this is the best on-the-ground legal reporting that we're going to get on these important issues. And Adam, let's do this again when we get a chance, when there's breaking news.
Anytime. My pleasure, Joyce.
See y'all soon. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Can't believe it. 3.8 thousand people in the middle of an afternoon. Don't let anybody tell you America has lost it. We are still here.
Bye-bye.